I'd never seen a contract like that before, not in my entire career as a corporate lawyer, and I've read thousands. I've reviewed merger agreements thick enough to prop open a door, non-disclosure clauses so tight they could strangle a conversation, and employment contracts that read like indentured servitude dressed up in legalese. But this was something else entirely. It was midnight when the courier delivered it to my apartment. A single white envelope, no return address. But the paper was so thick it felt like silk, heavy, textured, almost alive in my hands. I remember the way the streetlight caught the edges as I turned it over, searching for any clue about the sender. There was nothing, just my name, handwritten in elegant black ink, and the faint scent of cologne that I couldn't place but would later learn to recognize in my sleep. Inside was a signed non-disclosure agreement, a blank check, and a handwritten note from Julian Ashford, the reclusive billionaire who owned half the tech in my phone. "Read this alone," the note said. "If you accept, meet me at my penthouse at 2 a.m. Come alone. Burn this note." I stood there in my kitchen, barefoot, still wearing my work blazer, and I laughed, a sharp, hollow laugh that echoed off the tile floor. This had to be a prank. One of my colleagues, maybe, or an old law school friend with a twisted sense of humor, but the check was real. The ink was still wet, and the paper had that crisp, official feel of a certified bank draft. I stared at the blank amount line, and my mind started racing. How much? 100,000? 1,000,000? More? And the NDA? It was ironclad. I read through it twice, my professional eye catching every detail. If I told anyone about what I was about to see, I'd lose my license, my savings, and probably my freedom. There was a clause about irreparable harm, and another about liquidated damages that made my stomach clench. You don't say no to Julian Ashford, not if you want to keep your job, not if you want to keep breathing. I'd heard the rumors, the whispers in boardrooms about his temper, his connections, the way people who crossed him seemed to vanish from the industry overnight. I told myself it was just corporate paranoia, the kind of gossip that fuels water cooler chatter. But standing there in my kitchen, holding that envelope, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. So at 1:45 a.m., I pulled into the underground garage of his private tower. The parking structure was immaculate sterile white walls, soft lighting, and not a single other car in sight. My sedan looked out of place among the sleek Porsches, and a matte black Rolls-Royce that gleamed like a predator in the shadows. The elevator opened directly into his living room. It was sparse, almost empty, except for a single glass table and 2 chairs. The walls were bare, the floors polished concrete, and the only decoration was a massive window that framed the city skyline like a living painting. He was already there, standing by the window, his back to me. He wore a black turtleneck and jeans which felt wrong. Billionaires are supposed to wear suits, even at night. I'd seen his photo in Forbes in a tailored Armani, looking like he owned the world. But here, in the dim light, he looked almost ordinary. If ordinary meant carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets. "Ms. Delacroix," he said without turning. His voice was low, measured, like he was choosing each word with care. "Thank you for coming. Your note was dramatic." I set my bag on the floor, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. He finally turned. Julian Ashford was younger than his photos. In magazines, he looked 40, cold, calculating a machine in human skin. In person, he looked 32, exhausted and terrified. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they were fixed on me like I was the only person in the world. There were shadows under them, deep purple crescents that spoke of sleepless nights. His hands were shoved into his pockets, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like he was bracing for a blow. "I need you to sign something," he said, "and then I need you to keep a secret for the rest of your life." I sat down. The chair was cold against my back, and the glass table between us felt like a barrier, or maybe an altar. "I'm a lawyer, Mr. Ashford. Secrets are my business." He slid a second envelope across the table. Inside was a contract, but it wasn't corporate. It was personal. It had my name, his name, and a list of conditions that made my stomach drop. I read it slowly, my eyes scanning each line with the same precision I used in court. Term, 12 months. Compensation, $5 million. Duties, attend all public events as my fiancé, appear affectionate in public, live in my penthouse, never disclose the arrangement, and under no circumstances fall in love. I looked up. "This is a marriage contract." "Fake marriage," he corrected. He sat down across from me, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. "I need a fiancé for a year. You're perfect. You're smart, you're beautiful, and you have no emotional ties to my world. You're a blank slate." I should have walked out. I should have called security. Every instinct I had as a lawyer screamed at me to leave. This was a trap, a game, something dangerous. But the check was for $5 million. That kind of money could pay off my mother's medical bills, my student loans, and buy me a future I'd never dreamed of. I thought of her face, pale and tired, the way she'd smiled through her chemo treatments. I thought of the debt that hung over me like a guillotine. And I thought of the life I could build with that kind of freedom. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're the only person who's ever looked at me without wanting something." That was a lie. I wanted the money, but I didn't say that. I just stared at him, at the vulnerability flickering behind those storm cloud eyes, and I felt something shift inside me. Curiosity, maybe, or pity, or the first whisper of something I didn't dare name. I signed. The next morning, my phone exploded. News outlets had leaked photos of us kissing in his elevator, a staged kiss, obviously, but the angle made it look real. My friends texted me in panic. My boss called, demanding an explanation, and my mother, bless her heart, asked if Julian was the nice kind of rich or the scary kind. I told her the nice kind. I was lying. The first month was a performance. Galas, charity dinners, red carpets. Julian held my hand like I was made of glass. He whispered things in my ear that the cameras couldn't hear. Instructions, mostly. Smile. Lean. Closer. Don't look at the paparazzi. His breath was warm against my skin, and I had to remind myself that it was all an act. But at night, when the cameras were gone, he became someone else. He'd pour 2 glasses of wine and sit across from me in silence. He never touched me without permission. He never raised his voice, and he never, ever let me see his phone. "What are you hiding?" I asked one night, 3 weeks in. We were on his balcony, the city glittering below us, like a field of stars. He was leaning against the railing, his glass of wine untouched. He looked at me with those storm cloud eyes. Everything. Then, at a private dinner hosted by his biggest rival, I saw him break. The restaurant was a Michelin-starred affair, all velvet booths and candlelight, but the atmosphere was tense. A woman in a red dress approached our table. She was beautiful, cold, and she looked at me like I was a bug under a microscope. "Julian," she said, "still playing house?" His hand tightened on mine. "Lydia." "I see you found a new prop," she said. "Does she know about the last one?" I didn't understand. Not then, But later, in the car, Julian's hands were shaking. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. "She was my fiancée," he said quietly. "3 years ago, she signed the same contract, and then she died." The car went silent. The hum of the engine filled the space between us, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "It was a car accident," he continued, "but the police said it wasn't an accident. Someone wanted to hurt me, and they used her to do it." I stared at him. "You think I'm in danger?" "I know you are. That's why I chose you. You're a lawyer. You know how to protect yourself, and you have nothing to lose." He was wrong. I had everything to lose. I just didn't know it yet. Around the 2-month mark, something shifted. We were at a charity auction, and Julian bid on a painting I'd mentioned once in passing, a small watercolor of a lighthouse, its beam cutting through a storm. He paid $40,000 for it. When the auctioneer handed it to me, Julian leaned in and whispered, "You said you missed the ocean." I had. I'd said it once during a late-night conversation when I thought he wasn't listening, but he was always listening. I'd told him about growing up near the coast, about the way the salt air felt like home, about the lighthouse that had guided my father's fishing boat. He'd nodded, asked a few questions, and then moved on. But he hadn't forgotten. That night, back at the penthouse, I caught him staring at me while I read a book. I was curled up on the couch, a thriller in my hands, but I could feel his gaze like a physical weight. "You're not like the others," he said. "What others?" "The people who sign contracts. They always ask for more. More money, more time, more attention. You just exist. It's refreshing." I laughed. "I'm not refreshing, I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of feeling something real." He didn't answer, but he moved closer, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me for real, not for the cameras. His hand hovered near my cheek and I could smell his cologne, that same scent from the envelope. But he stopped. He pulled back, and he said, "Remember the contract." I remembered. The words were burned into my mind. Under no circumstances, fall in love. But it was too late. I was already falling. Subscribe call to action around here. If you're feeling this story, if your heart is racing like mine was that night, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, the best part is coming, and you don't want to miss it. Every week I share confessions like this, raw, real, and unforgettable. So subscribe now, and let's keep this journey together. The 4th month was when my past caught up with us. My ex-boyfriend, Derek, found out about the arrangement. He was a journalist, and he'd been following Julian's company for years, digging for dirt. One afternoon, he showed up at my office with a folder full of photographs, photos of Julian with Lydia, photos of the accident, photos of the police report. The images were grainy, taken from a distance, but they told a story I didn't want to hear. "He's using you, Alara," Derek said. His voice was smug, like he'd just won a prize. "He's done this before. He finds a woman, pays her to pretend to love him, and then she ends up dead. You're just a shield." I wanted to believe he was lying. But the evidence was there. Julian had a pattern, and I was the next line. I looked at the photos, Lydia's car, crumpled like a tin can, the emergency lights reflecting off the asphalt, and I felt my stomach turn. I confronted Julian that night. I threw the folder on his glass table. "Explain." He didn't flinch. He opened the folder, looked at the photos, and then closed it. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. "Lydia wasn't killed because of me. She was killed because of her father. He was a rival investor. He used her to get to me, and when she failed, he had her eliminated." "And you didn't think to tell me this before I signed? If I told you, you wouldn't have signed." "You're right. I wouldn't have." He stood up. "But you did sign. And now you're in too deep. If you leave, he'll come after you. If you stay, I can protect you." "Protect me? You can't even protect yourself." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes. Not exhaustion, not fear, but desperation. "I know. That's why I need you." I should have run. I should have packed my bags and disappeared, but I didn't, because in that moment I realized the contract wasn't about business. It was about fear. Julian Ashford wasn't a cold billionaire. He was a terrified man who had built a fortress around his heart, and he had chosen me to be the one person allowed inside. The 6th month was when everything broke open. We were at his family estate for a weekend retreat, a sprawling manor in the countryside, all stone walls and ivy. His mother was cold, his father was dismissive, and his brother, Marcus, spent the entire weekend trying to provoke Julian into a fight. I watched Julian shrink into himself, becoming the silent, guarded man I'd first met. He barely spoke at dinner, and when Marcus made a snide comment about his latest acquisition, Julian just stared at his plate. But that night, after dinner, I found him in the garden, sitting on a stone bench, staring at the stars. The air was cool, and the roses smelled sweet, but he looked lost. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said, sitting beside him. "Yes, I do. That's the deal." "The deal is over, Julian. I'm not a contract anymore. I'm a person." He turned to me, and his eyes were wet. "I don't know how to be real with anyone. I've been faking it for so long, I forgot what real feels like." I took his hand. "Then let me teach you." We kissed. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for a contract. It was real. And it was terrifying. His lips were soft, hesitant, like he was afraid I'd break. But I didn't break. I held on. The 8th month was when Lydia's father, the rival investor, made his move. He leaked the contract to the press. Suddenly, every tabloid in the country was running headlines. "Julian Ashford's fake fiancé exposed. Billionaire love scam." My name was dragged through the mud. My mother called me in tears. My boss fired me. I sat in the penthouse, watching the news, and I felt my world crumble. The reporters were merciless, dissecting every detail of our arrangement. They called me a gold digger, a con artist, a pawn. I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in. Julian came home at midnight. He looked exhausted, his hair disheveled, his tie loose. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have never dragged you into this." "You didn't drag me. I signed." "You didn't know what you were signing." I stood up. I knew exactly what I was signing, a contract to protect a man who was too scared to ask for love. And you know what? I fell for it. I fell for you. He stared at me. "You fell for me?" "Yes. And now everyone knows I'm a fraud. I'm just a paid actress in your life." He walked toward me slowly. "You're not an actress. You're the only real thing in my life, and I'm sorry I was too scared to see it. Don't. I love you, Alara, not because of a contract, because of who you are." I wanted to believe him, but the headlines were screaming in my ears. "How do I know you're not just saying that to keep me quiet?" "Because I tore up the contract." I looked at him. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was the contract, ripped in half, the edges jagged. "I did it 2 weeks ago. I just didn't know how to tell you." His hand was shaking as he held it out to me. The 10th month was about rebuilding. We went public together, not as a fake couple, but as a real one. We gave an interview where Julian admitted everything, the contracts, the fear, the mistakes. He didn't hide. He didn't run. He stood beside me and held my hand while the world judged us. The camera lights were blinding, but he never let go. "I don't deserve her," he said on live television. His voice cracked, but he kept going. but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her. The 11th month was quiet. We traveled, we laughed, we fought over stupid things like toothpaste caps and TV shows, normal things, real things. He learned to cook badly, and I learned to let him. We spent weekends in bed, reading and talking and pretending the world didn't exist. And on the last day of the year, Julian got down on one knee in our kitchen, no cameras, no contracts, just a simple ring and a simple question. The stove was on and the smell of burnt toast filled the air. He looked nervous, like he was about to make a pitch to a board of directors. "Will you marry me for real?" I said yes. Now, sitting here in the dark, telling you this story, I still can't believe it happened. I was a lawyer who signed a contract for money. I ended up with love for free. But here's the truth, I learned. Sometimes the most real things start as fiction. Sometimes the people who seem the most broken are the ones who need the most love. And sometimes the best thing you can do is tear up the contract and start over. If you've ever felt like your life was a performance, like you were pretending to be someone you're not, I want you to know, it's okay to stop pretending. It's okay to let someone see the real you, even if it's terrifying, even if it's messy. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you feel even a fraction of what I felt, please subscribe. Because every week, I bring you stories like this, stories of love, loss, and the moments that change us forever. And if this confession stayed with you, subscribe for more midnight confessions. There is always another secret waiting to be told.